Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video, I'm again going to do something special. You know what that means? Yes, PowerPoints, all of that. I found the comments really funny on the last one. People saying, "I can't believe I watched 40 minutes of a PowerPoint for entertainment," things like that. I thought that was pretty funny. Sometimes I can't believe that's the type of thing I'm making, but I seem to have found a spot that people enjoy. Certainly not that the other content, the lives, the videos, all the normal things aren't enjoyed, but I certainly seem to have found a spot in making these semi-simplistic explainer videos for things that I think people who watch my channel tend to like and tend to get something out of. So I appreciate all of you watching them. But there was an interesting article, and I spoke about in the last couple of weeks. I've been trying to break down, United's wage, how the wages are being cut, how they could spend significantly this summer without Europe, the overhaul of the recruitment structure, and the focus on age and potential and youth and an upswing and all of these types of things. And I've talked about this among a bunch of different videos, and I wanted to kind of put it all together in a way that was understandable as to what United are actually doing, how they're budgeting, how they're planning, the way that they want to build a squad, and also give a bit of an explanation as to, why United are kind of so bad right now. Because they are. They're really bad right now. But it actually makes a lot of sense when you start to look at the squad and look at what we've done in comparison. And it'll make sense when I go through this. But it was an interesting thought experiment. And again, most of this is, some of this is just like perspective, but a lot of it is based on actual conversations that I've had in terms of understanding the view of things and what the planning that's ongoing and all of that. So hopefully you find it interesting. There was an article the other day talking about how, United's planning for 4 years in Europa and yada yada and all of that. Um, and then also saying United actually have planned for no Europe next season. They've actually done the financial planning for no Europe next season. Now, it's really important to understand because I've seen some silly comments. United are doing financial planning for 4 years in the Europa League, but you have things about winning the league in 3 years. People really got to understand. This is my point on money. This is my point on finance. People who plan for finance plan for like the lowest common denominator. What is the worst case scenario? How do we balance the budget for that? Okay, that's proactive financial planning rather than reactive financial planning. So people will say things like, well, United are making all these cuts and things. Maybe they're going over the top. They might be. But any financial planner with sense will be planning for the lowest common denominator. What is the worst where we can really end up in the foreseeable? And making sure that a business, a company, or an organization is financially stable based on that. And I recommend that as a strategy for any business or personal budgets and things like that too, that you look at not like if you have a catastrophe type of thing, though you should have catastrophic financial planning, but more so like, people often plan when they're thinking with money, when they're thinking with things, they plan for the good stuff, but they don't think about what if what if this is all I can get? What if there's no raise or bonus this month or something like that? What are the finances actually going to look like? What do I need? How can I get by? How do I set up my expenses to make sure that almost no matter what, I will survive? I will get by. That is proper financial planning. So the financial planning is going to be different than goals. Goals are not the same thing as financial planning. Financial planning is for, let's make sure no matter what happens, we can do what we need to do to survive and to keep going and get where we need to be. Whereas your goals are obviously what you're trying to accomplish. And the same goes for the football club. There's terms for this. I'm not an accountant. I'm just a person who does things. But so I'm not always good with like terminology of these things. There will be accountants and people who will reply and who will correct me on certain terms and things that I use for this, because I know that these things there's actual terms for this type of planning. But that's what United are doing. And so when I explain like the minimum basis that they're going off of, this is why a lot of the decisions are getting made. So, they've planned for without Europe next season. What can we do? Now, you could say, well, if they plan for relegation, no, because you kind of can't plan for relegation. The consequences of are so dire. You just have to like pump in 200 million into the club and hope you get promoted in one season. then you're still kind of in trouble. And how that would affect sponsorships and players, that's like a disaster zone, right? Like beyond the realm of possible real planning. But that's not going to happen. United should be fine now. But they have planned for these kinds of worst case scenarios. Otherwise, no Europe, all of that. And they're going to plan for Europa League because they believe that is what is definitely achievable year over year with the plans that they've laid out. And ideally, they do better than that, quicker than that, but they want to have those plans in place. So let's get down to United's planning. And are United prepared for the almost worst, and why United are doing so shit? So I think you'll find this kind of interesting. Yeah. What if United miss Europe? So based on prior videos I've explained on PSR versus profit, all of that kind of stuff. Based on prior videos, United, when Ineos came in, they looked at the budget and said, we need to somehow balance it by about 80 million a year to be in good shape. That's where they needed to be. And so they were basing all their decisions off of that. And based on Europa League revenues, they needed to cut it about 80 million. Without Europa League, they actually need to cut it more, but based on Europa League revenues, they need to cut about 80 million. The latest financial releases that have come out indicate United have already, with cuts that they've made, additional jobs, things like that, savings that they've put in place, some of the investment that meant a little bit lower balances on revolving debt and things like that, their yearly expenses should already have come down by 40 to 50 million based on those cuts, savings, and all of that. Looking at last summer, United already cut about 13 million from wages on the player wage bill. So it's actually a little bit more than that because of Champions League. There's a drop off on other wages and things, but this is what is like definitively cut, right? There's actually a little bit even more because I didn't have like players like Kambuala or Alvaro in here, but it was so minimal I didn't really think of it. But you can see they moved on all of these players here, moved in these. The overall wages came down about 13 million a year with bringing all these players in. Again, they brought in a lot of low wage players and shed some pretty big high earners. They've also saved, but this is just for this season alone, 15 to 20 million on loans with Rashford's wages covered, Sancho, thing. It might even be more than this when you factor that in. Malacia, Antony, all of that. So when you add it all up, United need to save about 20 million more in wages with Europe in order to balance the budget. So what about this summer? If United miss out on Europa League, they lose an estimated 30 million net in revenue after costs. So you gain more than that, but you have to pay for staffing. You have to pay for, you don't get 40 million and you make 40 million in profit. You're going to have to spend some of that paying for game day staff, the expenses that come with actually operating, the club for all those games. The wages take a small drop from the current wages because there are wages that are based on Europe, but there's also a lot of incentive-based wages based on appearances, starts, things like that. Well, if you're not playing those games, you're not paying those wages, fewer games, fewer incentives, drop in wages. So United will save about 10 million there. That means United have to cut 20 million more, plus 30 million for loss of revenue, minus the 10 million they've already cut. They need to reduce the wages about 40 million. Okay? When you look at these numbers over here, okay, and the greens are the players that are guaranteed to leave. Eriksen, Lindelof, Evans, Heaton, and Sancho. These are free agents. This is an obligation. That is about 37.5 million in wages right there. So the wages that are leaving pretty much balance the books for United missing out on summer, missing out on Europa League or any Europe this summer. They balance the books. They give United a point where they're okay. But that doesn't mean they can spend anything, right? So just with the departures that are for sure guaranteed, the books are balanced. Now, if you look at the departures of the loanees expected on permanent deals or further loans, it contributes to another 24.5 million. So Rashford is almost 100% going to leave. Well, that's 12, 13 million alone in wages from him. He has a 40 million option. He's doing well at Villa. It's pretty guaranteed that he will get purchased this summer, whether it's by Villa or Barcelona or somebody else. He will leave. That saves United extra wages. Antony's doing very well. He wants to stay at Betis another year at the least. They could buy him. They'd have to pay us like 30 million, which would be a little bit rough. So what is possible, however, is perhaps a loan plus obligation, where they cover the cost of the wages for a year. They pay 15 million next season, and we get the wages off this year. We get the amortization off next year. That's a possibility. Malacia is on a pretty cheap deal that will probably get done as well to somewhere. But even if a few of these, even if Antony or Malacia just got loaned again, we would still get that wage space. So we can strongly expect to have about 62 million, leaving 22 million in wage space to be added to the team. That's what we can add to the team. Let's assume that. Now, we haven't talked about other players, which we will in a minute, like Casemiro, Mount, Shaw, and others who we could definitely move on. But these are like the guys who are definitely going and like 80, 90% likely to not be here next season. There's more. There's definitely more that could. But I just want to look at, again, almost like the minimum viability planning. The minimum viability planning, we're okay. With the expected departures we can spend. We can get 22 million. I'm not going to talk much about fees here because we get Sancho's amortization off. We got to apply that to buying players. We get profit for Rashford. We got to apply that for buying players. If we can get some amortization off for Antony or Malacia or others, we got to apply that to buying players. So we won't worry about that, but there should be enough there to fund the transfer fees. So mostly we just need to look at the wages because those are definitely the ongoing costs in there. So moving forward, what can you get for 22 million? Well, last summer, Yoro, Ugarte, Xerxes, Dorgu, Heaven, Cheeto, Leon, Kone, and Mazraoui, everybody we've signed between January and last summer, barring Delict, add up to only 27 million. So for 22 million, you can actually get an awful lot of players if you're buying players on low wages. You got to think with Yoro and Ugarte, they're on like 5. Xerxes, just over 5. Dorgu on like 2.5. Heaven, guys like Heaven and Cheeto are on virtually nothing, and Leon as well, and Kone as well, and Mazraoui's on, something like 6 or 7. So you add it up, you can do pretty well with that if you're buying young players on low wages, something we have not done that often, where we've often tried to convince players by paying them enormous wages, 150 to 200,000 a year, a week for players who are just not at that level at all and who were probably making 20 to 25 before. You look at the case of players like Wan-Bissaka, who's making probably 20 at Crystal Palace, and we give him a huge bump to 150. You look at like Antony, who might have been making 40, we give him a huge bump to 125. Like we do that, we've done that too much. We haven't done that this last summer, where we're taking these players and bringing them to near their similar levels of overall wage structures. Now, Casemiro's worth about 18, Mount 13, Shaw 13 in wages. If we sold them, or because it'd be difficult to sell, especially Mount, it would be difficult to sell. Shaw, since we don't owe anything on him, we could potentially transfer him for free, but I don't know who would do that. Point being, even if we loaned some of those players and people took a portion of their wages, it still makes a significant difference to us. If Casemiro got loaned and someone paid half his wages and then he expires from next season, then we save 9 million, and next season we save 18 million, plus his amortization falls off of another 13 or 14. So it would be huge savings for next summer. Regardless, anything we can move on from those players will give us, whether it's a sale, whether it's a loan, is going to give us more space to add to the wage bill. Young players like Kenda, Hackney, Rigg, Braithwaite, Hoyson, these are examples. James Trafford would set the club back less than the needed amount. If you look at the total I've given over here as estimated wages, Kenda, Ederson or Hackney. Ederson's not on big wages either, by the way. Hackney, Rigg, Nippon, Mastantuono, Joe Bellingham, Braithwaite or Hoyson, Trafford. If you added all of those up and you take out the big one for like Osimhen that I just included in here as an example, you would come to something like 20 million, maybe I think a bit less than that. My math could even be, this might even be too high. Let me think about that for a second, because it's about 13 alone. Yeah, so you'd come out to about 15 million, just, with all those other, you could get all those other players, Kenda, Hackney, Rigg, Braithwaite, Trafford, you're coming out to about 15 million in wages. If you got a younger striker like Delap or Aghawa, on wages, you'd probably only be paying 100,000. You could get well in under 22 million just with all and get all of those players. But potentially, as I said, if we can move other players on, there is technically space for more. United could make a significant signing or two, especially with extra departures of the above, or if, of course, United win the Europa League and end up qualifying for Champions League. But like I said, there's like the bottom level planning. Even with bottom level planning, we probably could make one bigger signing from a wage perspective and sign 4 or 5 other young players into the team and do quite well in rounding out the squad as a whole. But that's the bottom level. So, budgets can be increased if we qualify for Champions League by winning Europa League, or I don't think this is even possible, but by some miracle, we climb up the table 20 points and we get to like Conference League or Europa League spots, and there's more revenue there, then, it would just add to all of this, as would sales. So there's bottom level planning, and with bottom level planning, we can buy a number of decent young players and pay their wages, as well as a potentially at least one significant signing if the opportunity presents itself. So let's talk about then part of additional to this, why United are so bad right now. Right? And what they're trying to get away from and why this young strategy. If you go back to my recruitment video talking about it, getting young players, getting high potential players in, and stopping these old player things. Well, I think everybody can see the problem here. But for years, United have bought old and expensive. You look at Zlatan, Cavani, Matic, Casemiro, Eriksen, Alexis Sanchez. High wages, high costs, no resale value on declining players. Then we've had luck with a few young academy players that come in and prop up the team underneath it and hold up this core of aging stars that are put together poorly. Your Rashfords, your McTominays, your Mainus, your Garnachos that have kind of come through at the right times, and obviously others that I didn't want to put on here like Greenwood and such, that they did when they were here help prop the team up coming through. And then you have all these aging kind of older stars on top of that. Now, the problem is a lot of those aging stars were the players, of course, carrying the team in a respect for a season or two. Rafael Varane, when he was good, he was amazing. Ten Hag's first season. Casemiro, same goes for him. Zlatan for a year. Matic for a year or two. Alexis didn't really ever carry us. Eriksen the first season. Cavani. Where you go think about the seasons we've had, where would we be without the Cavani's, right? Where would we be without the Casemiro? Where would the season that they performed well, where would we be without Varane? Where would we be without Matic for one of those seasons? The seasons where we did okay and we finished in the top 4. Where would we be without some of those older players? We'd be shit. But the problem is that also has devastating consequences for the long term of the club, because those players are always in decline. And that is the theory. So let's take a look at this. I tried to do this as an example of the squad going into last summer. Declining squad and a big, and big overpay. So I looked at based on three things. Based on purely age and view of potential. How many were on the potential upswing and how many were on the downswing and how many were kind of in their prime to stay level. If you go through the entire squad, the 5 players you could have considered that might have been on the upswing of their careers were Garnacho, Hoyland, Antony, Dallo, and Malasi. I'm talking about last season, okay? That's it. 5 players in the improvement arc. And of those, one was Garnacho from the academy. In Antony and Hoyland, we made huge overpays, and they were bad transfers, massive overpays, 2 or 3 times their value. And what's the problem with that? You can get young potential players that don't work out, but if you're overpaying, you need to be able to buy 2 of them for that price. So if one doesn't work out, you turn and you can resell them, and you have another one. If we bought 2 right wingers last season, instead of 80 million on Antony, if we bought 2 or 3 for 20, 30 million each, then if one doesn't work out, Antony, you could sell him for 5 million right now and break even. And another one, you have 1 or 2 more kind of coming through. So even with those, they made huge mistakes. Malacia was, of course, also coming off an injury. So you literally had, outside of the academy, with Garnacho, Dallo last season was the only decent value improving player. And we bought him like 6 years ago. Okay? Like, we bought him a long time ago. So he's even almost kind of maybe in his prime now and potentially on the decline. We had 6 players in our prime ages. Rashford, Bruno, McTominay, Lisandro Martinez, and Andre Onana. And then you had 9 players who are in decline and on big wages. Anthony Martial, Mason Mount, crazy how that one worked out. Eriksen, Casemiro, Amrabat, Varane, Lindelof, Maguire, and Shaw, all of them in decline in their careers at the point where they're at now. Amrabat, I don't know. I was alone, whatever. Maybe he was just maybe he's in his prime. I don't know. We definitely didn't improve at United over where he was. So you get into this constant race of stagnation where your best talents, your Varanes, your Shaws, your Casemiros, your Eriksens, are all declining. And then you have, when I'm saying you take last season to this season, all those players, Varane's gone, Casemiro declined, Eriksen declined, Shaw declined, doesn't even play, Martial gone, and then you have setbacks and departures with your prime players, your best players, being relied upon. Lisandro gets an injury, Rashford leaves, Scott leaves, and all you're left with is Bruno. Just Bruno is the only player left. So when you look at why are we bad right now, that gives you a very succinct kind of answer. All of the players we were relying on were in decline. Every single one of them, Varane, Casemiro, Eriksen, Shaw, Lisandro, Rashford, McTominay, would make up the majority of the players that were performing for us over the last couple of seasons, all in decline or leaving, or have left or gotten injured for one reason or another. All of them. Every single one of those. Bruno is the only player that is left. And you can see he's performing. Well, because that's what happens, right? So it's this constant race. And we've been doing it for years and years and years where we're constantly having our best players are the ones who are in decline. Our best players are the ones that are dropping off. And then we buy more like that. We buy Varane too old. We buy Casemiro too old. We buy Ronaldo too old. And they decline. So year by year, we get worse. And instead of taking 1 year and next year is like, okay, next year we're going to get better. Next year we get worse because our best players are in the decline. They're not in the upswing of their career. They're in the decline. So even though we buy more, our better players are declining, and we're always racing to replace them and always feeling like we need to get more win now players who only last 2 years. There's a lot of red on this chart when you look at it. And if you go back to during Ollie's time, it was the same issue. Is the same problem. We actually were in an upward trend, even without great transfers when we got Maguire, Wan-Bissaka, Dan James, and then Bruno in January, because those were all players probably in the upswing of their career. And then you go into the next summer, even then, we didn't do enough, right? But it was like some improvements, And then you look at the final summer, and it was old players, win now players, and the decline started, and we've never really climbed back from that. And we've done the same thing every single time with managers, where instead of these young, high potential type of players, we're changing it. Instead of players in their upswing, we're always racing against this decline. Um, so the goal is to improve the squad and get in proper cost controls. If you look at the plan, based on the budget that we went through, let's say you get a young striker in like a Dilap. Instead, I'm not saying we shouldn't get Osimhen, but let's just say you got a young striker and you'd expect him to be on the upswing. You'd expect to have Cheeto, Højlund, Xerxes, who are all on the upswing of their careers. And maybe they're not. Maybe they're all not. And bearing in mind, this is just on the basis of age. Some of them won't work. That's why you want to have a lot of options, because some of them won't work out. Højlund, maybe he's gone. But then you have Cheeto, you have Xerxes, who I think are both on the upswing in their career. I think Xerxes improving week after week, and that could be considered. You have Bruno still in his prime, Garnacho on the way up, or sold, and another player brought in who is on their way up, who is in the growth arc of their career. You have Ahmad on his way up. You bring in a backup 10, like we put in the names there, a young player like Chris Rick on the way up. Dorgu on the way up. Leon on the way up. Kabi Menu on the way up. Hackney up. Ugarte up. Kone up. Kenda up. Dallo in his prime. Euro up. Mazraoui in his prime. Maguire declining. Delict on his way up. Braithwaite or Hoyson or someone like that up. Martinez flat or declining depending on his injury. A young keeper like Trafford up. Onana where he is. Point being, you're not saying every one of these players is going to work or going to improve, but you give yourselves, instead of 5 potential players who could get better, you give yourself 16. You give yourself 16 players you would expect to be improving in your squad of 22, your main squad of 22 or 23. And then you have youth players from the academy and things like that. You've purchased them at good prices and wages. If they don't improve, you can turn around and resell them. We could resell Xerxes because we bought him for 35. If he doesn't improve, this summer he could go for 25 and we'd be okay. Next summer he could go for 15 and he'd be okay. Someone would buy him because he's young. He's still got talent and potential. Højlund, we'd have to sell for 40 million. So overpaying is a huge problem there. But they're also on low wages, so easy to resell. You get like 6 players in their prime ages, and will we be great? No, because you want more players who are probably at their peak to win the league. You're not going to do it with a bunch of players who are potential, who are improving, right? But eventually, the players who improve will become players in their prime, and you want to get good players underneath them. It's also easier when you're getting these young players in, to adapt, for them to mold them to whatever system you're playing. You have few players in your prime ages and little to no decline. So you can get more purchases, better fit players, an upward trending team. So even if you're not there right away, hence 4 years planning of Europa League, even if you're not there right away, you have a team that is constantly getting better and better and better and better. And that gives you, rather than you're constantly fighting against decline, this gives you the ability to add key, like, prime age players on top in that 25 to 28 age bracket, with costs controlled and, and all these resale values. So if some of these players don't work out, you can sell them, move them on. If you end up in Europe, if you have more money, if you get good opportunities, you could sign some top players. Ideally, you take a team like this and you're adding an Osimhen into it, and you're adding maybe a top center back into it or something like that. You're doing something. But you're continuing to have, but you're not buying players who are in decline. So you're giving your potential players time to get up to their best while your other players are still at their best. And that's important. And the result of going this way as a squad is improving year over year. That can have players fail and absorb it, can add top level players without buying all of them at top prices, and continuously maintain a pathway for youth. Again, getting players in at good prices, good fees, having them improve. We need some top players to be created at United, not only buying them when they're a top player, right? We need that. Liverpool did that successfully. They didn't buy all their players when they were in their primes. They bought a lot of them before they were at their best, but on the upswing. Same with Arsenal and same with many other clubs as well. So we're gonna need to, obviously. Um, you're not gonna be amazing off of the bat, but you're gonna have the proper trend for the team, and you're gonna need to ideally then put yourself in a position where you can buy some better players on top of that. But no more Casemiros, no more Varans, no more Ibrahimovic's and Cavani's and expensive players, barring 1 year loans. So Cavani was actually kind of okay in that respect. Barring little 1 year things, no more of that where you get stuck with players on high wages who are in the decline and you're constantly racing against it, and those are the performers. But this is why we're bad this season. All of our best players were in decline and leaving. Every single one of them, bar Bruno. Every single one. And we didn't have enough good young players underneath it. But even if we did, we would still be worse because you'd be losing all these top performers, and we didn't have the time to build up and grow underneath. We didn't have the players to do it. That's the theory. Anyway, this is the plan. This is the theory. This is the concept. This is the financial planning in place where they can execute this plan even without getting Europe. And they feel that that's going to give them a growth pattern back into Europe where they can then spend more. Financially, it may be a necessity. Without big sales, if we can't move Casemiro, Mount, Shaw, guys like that, or if we don't sell like Garnacho, for example, Garnacho obviously would fund some significant spending with the profitability and all of that, then that may be all we can do. Champions League qualification or further financial boons like sales or Champions League qualification could speed this whole process up, where you're getting these young players, but you can get a few more ready-made players into the team, talents that are good to go, to speed up the process, right? Again, not old, but that you can add some more top-level, more expensive, costly players. I'm not saying these ones below are all realistic. Osimhen's, your Cunha's, your Wirtz's, players that people would really want to get that are very expensive. We couldn't get them we can't get them really without probably something to speed the process up financially, be it, again, Champions League or, some major sales or something like that. So that may be where we go, is just ending up with a young team that's set to improve. Now, you're going to get a lot of different opinions. You're going to have some people look at this team and go, holy shit, we're going to get relegated. I mean, don't be silly. That's quite a decent team, actually. You have a lot of teams that have done stuff like this, that have at least, that grow, that do improve. I mentioned the Brighton example, and then, of course, they go on and sell all their players. But I showed, a Brighton team the other day, if they hadn't sold their best players, and it's probably a top 4 team, not going to lie. Regardless, then you look at it and say, frankly, the problem is this going over the top? Is this too many young players? Is this, you take a team that looks like this, you would say that team can't win anything. You're right, it can't. The problem is we have to overcorrect because it got so bad when you look at where we've been. It got so bad in terms of the declining talents, where we've lost all our good players because of their ages and all of that. And all we have left is potential. But we have to buy potential now because we don't have the ability to do anything else. And so this is the rebuild that should have happened. If we'd done things right, if instead of, buying Højlund and Antony for 150 million and Casemiro 200 million in there, we bought 6 good young players, 7 of them, we wouldn't be having this discussion today, because we'd have a different team that would have been on the upswing, that would have been able to balance the players in decline with players improving so that you can see progress year over year. It's simple math, but we didn't. And so now this is what has to be done. This is what a rebuild looks like. And this is why we're so bad right now. Because again, it's not, no one's sticking their head in the sand and saying like, going this route means you're going to be great. It doesn't. But you will get better. There's a lot of teams that have become better by going this route. The difference is they're not united. They don't have the financial capability to then go big. If we go this route, we can go big and add the big players on top of that. And unlike the Forests, unlike the Leicesters, unlike the Brightons, unlike the Fulhams, who have to sell their best players, we don't. We don't have to sell our best players in order every season to balance the books. Our wage and cost controls will be fine. We don't have to sell anybody. We can grow with it. And that's the biggest difference between us and these other clubs. Every year they have to sell their best players, their Caicedos and their McAllisters and their Ben Whites and all of that. They have to sell them. We don't have to do that. And that is the difference. So we have to buckle on and expect it. But if we're doing that, if we're playing a young team, if we're promoting academy players and we're really embedding in the system and we're seeing growth and improvement each next season, it will allow us to do more. And if we can then, and next season there will be a lot bigger financial ability if we do this right, because we won't be losing any of those players. They're all young, they're all up and coming. So if any don't work out, we can resell them. We'll be shedding contracts like Casemiro for sure by next summer. Maguire, others, right? So there's value in this long-term plan, but ideally we get something else like a sale of Casemiro or Champions League qualification or something like that that speeds up the process. But this is the financial planning that's ongoing. This is the reality we have to look with, and I really do just suggest to people to kind of strap in. I think it will go better than people think because we've never, ever had an aligned team of young, hungry, talented, physical players who fit a manager's idea at United. We've always been carried by individuals. Well, we're not going to be doing that anymore. We have to be carried by the collective. And I think that while the heights may not be there in the short term, we'll start to see a level of consistency and improvement that we have not had, where every day you know what you're going to get when you watch United, and it gets better and better. And that we've not had. Even during the good times, you'd go into a game and say, I don't know what we're going to see today. Because is Rashford going to pull something out of his ass? Is Casemiro? Is Cavani? Is Zlatan? Who knows, right? It would be magic instead of consistency, and that's what we need to see. So that's the theory, okay? Whether it works is another story. I'm not here to tell you it will. I'm here to tell you the plan. And this is where these people have to earn their keep or not. This is where we get to judge Wilcox, Vivell, etc. Can they find the right players to do this and to do it successfully? Do they have the right manager? Can they manage the team, the squad, and everything correctly to make this happen? We'll see. We will see. But this is the plan. So I just say, buckle in because it's not going to be easy. And it's not going to be quick, but it's probably what is necessary. I can understand the plan and I don't disagree with it. I have plenty of doubts myself about it, but we'll see. We'll see if they pull it off, if they can pull off this is what a rebuild looks like. And if they can pull off the rebuild, which isn't an easy thing to do, then, we'll see consistency for the long term and stability for the long term. Okay. Hopefully that was interesting. Hopefully it was helpful. This is the plan. This is the theory. This is what they're looking at. All right. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on. See you in the next video.